The beginning of Parshat Bamidbar deals with the count of the Jewish people and then proceeds to tell us how the Jewish people encamped, each by their degel, each by their flag, 3 on each side, surrounding the Ol Moed, surrounding the tent of meeting, and the Levim being inside the closest to the Ol Moed, while the Jewish people, the 12 tribes, surrounding Levim, which surrounded the Ol Moed. There's a very interesting dynamic that the Meged Yosef points out in source number 1, and it's this dynamic that I'd like to try, Mirz Hashem, to develop today. He says, L'chora yesh po nigud v'stira. L'chora, at first glance, there seems to be a contradiction in the way the count is established. If we take a look at source number 2, take a census of the entire assembly of the children of Israel, according to their families, according to their fathers' households, by number of the names, every male according to their head count. So note the Meged Yosef. On the one hand, you have by the number, and on the other hand, you have by the name. A number in its own right means that you're part of a larger group, right? If you have the number 2, it means that there is a number 1. You're comparing the number 2 to the number 1, and the number 3 to the 1 and 2. So the number relates to the idea of the global, the group. Mi'itach, on the other hand, aval shemot hu semel haprat v'yichud. While the number is talking about the group as large and not focusing in on the individual, the shemot, the names, is very much the individual. And this was the chachma of Adam HaRishon. This was his wisdom, that he gave every single animal a name, because that shows its uniqueness. So what do we have here? Were the Jewish people counted in a global form without paying attention to the individual? Or was the focus in on the individual, not so much on the larger whole? And the answer is both. We have here Yechudam Shel Yisrael in the bracket of 1. Bazeh she'eino soter klal, it's not a contradiction. Mitzad echad he mispar, yes, on one hand, Klal Yisrael is a number, and Kol Yochid Yoneke Kocho B'yoto Chelik Miklal Yisrael, and Klal Yisrael has to see themselves, every individual, as not as an individual, as much as part of a whole. They are a number. They are part of a unified unit. Ume'itach, on the other hand, Heim Shemot. Yes, every single person has a yichud, has a shem shelo, has their own unique place. And even though they're a number, that doesn't take away from their uniqueness. And this, he says, is so beautifully related in the 2 major descriptions that Klal Yisrael compared to in the Nevuah and the prophecy of Avraham Avinu. They're compared to the Kochvei HaShamayim, and we'll talk more about this today, the stars in the heaven, and each and every star has its own name, has its own brilliance, and that shows the Shemot, that shows the uniqueness of every person. As well as the Jewish people are compared to the sand on the beach. The sand, Kechol Asher Svat Hayam, each gargir of chol, each grain of sand, is not worth much in its own right. The sand is great in terms of its ability to join together, and when all the sands join together, then it becomes a mashu, becomes a something, becomes a sand on the beach. In that way, an individual sand, like each person, doesn't have their own individual worth. Their worth is found in the group. And this, he notes in the asterisk at the end of 3, is the brilliance of Klal Yisrael when we initiate a child into the bris shel Avraham Avinu. On the one hand, he becomes, when he has a bris milah, circumcision, like every other Jew. He has now entered into the covenant. But at the same moment that now he's entered into the covenant, and he can be counted as another number among the Jewish people, at that very same ceremony, he gets his name, which shows that this is an individual, not just a number. That dichotomy is what Klal Yisrael are all about. We're part of a whole, and we need to function within that whole, but yet at the same time we are very much an individual and have to recognize the status and the greatness that is inherent in each and every one of us. It's this balance that the Parsha is teaching us at the very beginning of Chumash Bamidbar that has to be for us a model of what Yiddishkeit is about. And it's not by accident that in most years, 9 out of 10, this year being a leap year, the exception, Parshat Bamidbar is always found before Shavuos. Because before we can accept the Torah, okay, it's 2 weeks before this year, before we can accept the Torah, we have to understand where are we in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in terms of His relationship with us. Are we accepting the Torah as a unified whole, or are we accepting the Torah as an individual? And the answer is really both at the same time. And that's the godless, that's the greatness of what Klal Yisrael is about, how the individual and the community